Welcome to How to Yu-Gi-Oh!
Historic Archetype, Invoked.
Chapter 1.
Here we are, and as I start this video, I want to say that I'm going to talk about Invoked in this video. Its historic, the archetype's historic impact in the game, and how it has influenced and changed things in Yu-Gi-Oh! That you hardly notice now. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video.
Chapter 2.
And here we are. History begins now. With the introduction of Invoked, something happened within Konami. Something changed. And at this point, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was never the same with what Invoked introduced into Yu-Gi-Oh! Invoked introduced the first ever Omni Negate. What is an Omni Negate? An Omni Negate is a card from the extra deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! That can negate a monster, spell, or trap. Right? Sure, at the time you had to send the corresponding card from your hand to negate the corresponding effect. If you wanted to negate a monster effect, you send a monster card from your hand. You wanted to negate a spell card, you send a spell card from your hand. You want to negate a trap card, you'd send a trap card from your hand, etc. And this is important as Invoked is the first archetype in the game to really showcase what power creep really is. Before this point, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a simple game, and we were living in simpler times. While negates existed, negates weren't really in Yu-Gi-Oh! Per se that were on monsters. Negates were on traps and counter traps. Stuff such as Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, things like that. Trap Hole, the hole traps, such sort of things. The aspect of negation was only on traps and counter traps. And even on counter traps, there weren't any omni negates. There wasn't an effect that could negate everything. So Invoked was the first time we saw this playing out. And as you go to the next slide, you can see the three fusion monsters that would become infamous in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. That would be Invoked Mechaba for the Omni Negation, the Purgatrio for going for the first OTK strategy, extra deck OTK strategy that we had, that was consistent. I want to bear this in mind. That was consistent, right? That wasn't gimmicky. You have to bear this in mind.
That sounds oddly familiar.
And Caligula, the first fusion, floodgate at that time that we had in the game. That's it. And one thing you have to realize is that Invoked introduced all these things into Yu-Gi-Oh!, but also introduced something that I'd like to really alliterate to us as players in Konami, is that it is the strongest fusion archetype that we've had at that time and for its time period.
That's really convenient.
And the reason why I would say it's the strongest, as it has the longest longevity for a fusion archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Since its introduction, it has been in countless decks, countless archetypes. It has been mixed, fusion. There's even been a meme at some point that normal summon Alistair go into Invoker. The fact that you could put an Omni Negate in many decks because of Invoked is a sign of what Invoked introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. Introduced this aspect that we are familiar with today, giving archetypes their own Omni Negate. Yes, Invoked is pivotal to understanding the spread of Omni Negates to every deck in the competitive scene.
That, my friends, makes all the difference.
Invoked is pivotal to explaining how decks start getting negates just out of nowhere. Invoked is the start of this familiar trend that we see today in every deck having an omni negate. So this is something that needs to be remembered. Where omni negates have come from, where they originated from, it was from invoked Merkaba. Remember this, students, remember this well. This is very important to realize. And also understand that when it comes to the amount of fusions that strong fusions that we had at the time, invoked was an archetype that was unparalleled in fusions in terms of their strength. Their strength was unmatched throughout the Konami-verse, as I'd like to call it. And that's really it, I've got to say. So let's head on to the conclusion.
Final chapter.
Here we are at the conclusion. So what I want to talk about when it comes to Invoked, what I want to say is that Invoked is important in Yu-Gi-Oh! As it introduced Omni-Negate for the first time in Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history. It showcased to us as players that Omni-Negates are part of the game and are something that we should be using and abusing more often. Because again, Invoked is, I will say with confidence, the strongest archetypal fusion deck of all time. Now, why do I say this? Is because of the results. Since Invoke's inclusion, it has been used in countless memes in the community. Its longevity, its versatility, flexibility, and how it has been able to withstand the ages of time and time again. The longevity of the archetype, the flexibility of the archetype, and the fact that even now we still talk about it to this very day showcases the strength of the archetype and its roots and origins. Now, many would say that the strongest archetype would be T elements. But to me, what I categorize as strength, my fellow students, is the longevity it's had in the competitive scene and the amount of years that it has had in the competitive scene. And it is without question, Invoked has results. T elements, you have to take consideration, right, does have the title of the strongest deck of all time. But that's all the title that it's got. The accolades and time it's spent in the competitive scene is relatively small in the big scheme of things. But when we look at Invoked and as a fusion archetype, what it's contributed to the fusion mechanic into Yu-Gi-Oh!, what it's contributed to the reasoning of the Omni-Negate, the flexibility, the mixing of archetypes, the introduction of, archetypal mixing, the introduction of putting an Omni-Negate into other decks to make it stronger, the normalization of strengthening archetypes has all been introduced. A lot of familiar things that we're familiar with in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the backbone and the foundation of those things can all be traced back to Invoked. And so let not this thing about Invoked really lessen your importance about it. It has had significant impact on our game, especially when it comes to archetype mixing and Omni-Negate implementation. As Invoked showcased to us as players that if you implement Omni-Negates in the correct way, they have significant impact on the strength of the deck that you are playing. And I think that's all I've got to say about Invoked. Tune in next time as I'll talk about more things on this channel. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.